Hello everyone, my name is Sean, better known as Negative Dreamer in the costume world. Today we are going to have a tutorial on how to make a leather bracelet from the Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. We're going to go over different methods and tools used to make it, so let's get started. For this section, we are going to go over all the tools needed to complete this project. Here are the Craft Tool Pro Super Shears that we'll be using to cut our leather during our project. Here's the Craft Tool Pro Classic Edger. For this project, we are going to use a number 2 size. Due to the thickness of our leather, we're going to be using 7 to 9 ounce. This is the multi-size wood slicker. This is going to help round our edges during our project. This tool is a 2-prong diamond punch. We're going to use a 2mm size, which basically tells us the space in between the prongs. We'll be using 2 5/8" gold buckles, all-purpose strap buckles, and we will need an oblong punch to make a hole for the tongue of our buckle. For the stitching part of our project, we're going to need blunted stitching needles, brown wax thread, and a set of needle nose pliers. For the carving and stamping part of our project, we're going to be using the Craft Tool Pro swivel knife and the Craft Tool beveler stamp. We're going to be using a poly head mallet and a hole punch. To color our leather, we're going to be using the Tandy brand EcoFlow leather dye and a 1-inch foam brush. For section 2, we're going to work on patterning your item. For today's project, I made my length on the bracer 9 inches by 5 inches. Feel free to adjust that to your liking. When selecting your leather, you want to get the right type. For this project, we're using vegetable tan leather. The reason I choose vegetable tan leather is that it takes dye very well and stamps and carbs exceptionally. When you pick out a piece, you want to make sure it doesn't have too many markings on it, especially watching out for holes that may not let you cut the leather piece where you want to. As I mentioned earlier, I talked about the weight or the ounces of the leather. That's actually a reference to the thickness of the leather. This is 7 to 9 ounce leather. It's got a lot of good properties that we use for our bracer, such as the thickness and stiffness we need to have it look and feel right, but also for the straps it has some flexibility. Right here is a 3 to 4 ounce piece of leather. It's much thinner, it won't have the depth in stamping and how it looks in your arm. It's going to be very flimsy too. It won't look like a real piece of armor. Sometimes you can even see leather thicker than this. It's probably good for the armor part of the bracer, but for the strapping, it's really going to be too thick. So I strongly suggest for 7 to 9 ounce leather. For this part of our segment, we're going to work on transferring our pattern to our leather. A couple things, make sure you work in pencil, as if you have a mistake, you can erase it very easily. Also, if you get ink on your leather, you're probably going to see it in your final project. Additionally, even though you see the pattern here, I did a quick sketch on the back side. This is going to help us in transferring this image to the other side of the leather. So when you push down with the pencil, it's going to kind of give some friction on the back side to help transfer it to the leather. So line up exactly where you would like. Trace on the outside as good as you can. Don't be scared to use a little pressure too. In case your pencil doesn't show up, the imprint will. And as long as you see the imprint, you'll be able to cut and work with whatever you need. For the interior part of our image, it's the same exact thing. Push on the paper as hard as you like, right over it, and that's going to give us the imprint on the leather. Now we're not going to cut on these interior lines, we're actually going to be carving them and stamping them later to give our piece some depth. That's one of the advantages of leather, you're able to stamp it, to give it a layered effect, but only have a single piece of leather. So take your time doing this. It's better to do it right the first time than have to take your image off and then realign everything, which you never quite get it perfect. I'm using a red or a green pencil right here. I like this type of pencil because I'll be able to wash the ink off the pencil off very easily. Some people use a regular pencil. Any color is fine, whatever's best for you works. For the next thing we're going to cut out our straps. As you know, on the Link Twilight Princess bracer, it's got 2 straps, one for the wrist and one for the forearm. So you kind of want to make these straps in reference to that. Make sure you leave extra for the overflap for the buckles, and leave a little extra for adjustment in case you have extra costume on you or things like that. I like to make my wrist measurement about 10-11 inches, and then my forearm bracers, so I have pretty strong forearms, around 16 inches. Feel free to adjust those numbers to your liking. So first, make one straight line. This will be 10 inches for the first strap. And as I said before, we're using 5/8" buckles. So get your width at 5/8, which is about here. And just go across so you can create a flat line. And then do it once again. with those measurements. Don't worry about being too exact. No one's gonna be that close to your costume to notice. And just do it once again. What about here? And here. And this one's gonna be about 16 inches for me. Feel free to adjust it to your model or yourself. We're gonna move on to cutting our leather now. Most important thing is to keep your blade perpendicular to the leather. This is gonna make the piece look nicer in the end and a lot less post-finishing to save a project. So I'm gonna cut the whole piece out first. You may not be able to see my traced lines from the video. Don't worry about it, they're there. And just take your time with it. For the thicker pieces, it may take a little effort to cut, but just stick with it. Take a break if you need to. Don't think you need to be a hero and have a perfect cut initially. Cut the outside out first, and you can come back out and do your detail cuts once that's done. I'm gonna continue cutting out for a more detailed cut. It's much easier to do this once your entire piece of leather is separated from that, because turning it around like this is much harder when you have a 5-foot piece going across your body. And get a little clean right there, and that's it. Same thing for the straps. I'm gonna cut down this long line. Just make sure you're relatively straight. There's 2 straps here, so I'm gonna kind of do them in 2 segments. Now, on this one, on one of the ends, you want to have a little rounded cut. Just looks nicer on your finished piece when you're putting the straps across. Same thing on this one. Next up, you do our edging. This is a little more of a process, but it's pretty easy. Get your edge beveler out, and you're gonna want to kind of put this at like a 45-degree angle to your leather. And you just kind of bring it around and take off that like corner of the leather. This is gonna give you a much nicer finished product. A lot of the cheaper items out there you're gonna have like a right angle edge. This will help give you a nice smooth edge. You go all the way around your item here. And don't forget to do both sides. Flip it over and do the same exact thing. At first you're gonna be slipping a lot, not getting it right, but the more you do it, the better you're gonna get. So don't get frustrated. There you go, and then the straps. Same exact process. This little part, flip it over. It's actually more important on the straps to do this. Even though it won't help the look of your piece so much, on the straps, having the straps on your skin that aren't rounded edges can be kind of uncomfortable and actually give you scrapes and cuts if it's directly on your skin and have anything in between it. So make sure you do it to your straps as well. For the next part of our project, we're gonna be smoothing out our leather edges. In the spot earlier, we kind of cut them. Now we're gonna make them nice and round and beautiful. I got these wet in the sink. It makes this process a lot easier. You're gonna take your wood slicker right here and just rub it along the side of your piece. You wanna do a little bit of force, but as you see as I go, it gets much smoother. And the more you do this, the nicer the edge is gonna get. And if you notice on your tool, it's got different thicknesses. Depending on your leather you're using is what thickness you're gonna use. The huge one you rarely use, that's usually for stacking 2 or 3 pieces of leather. So it's usually gonna be the second or the third spot on this. And just go all the way around. If it starts getting harder as you do this, do not be afraid to get it wet again. That won't do any damage to it. No longer that nasty right edge when you just cut it. Next to the straps. These ones are a little bit harder because they're gonna flex a lot more, but just stick with it. You will get it. And this tool will do both sides at the same time. So now some people will do this right after they dye their leather. Some people do it before. It's all personal preference. I prefer doing it before. Next up, we're gonna be carving our leather using our swivel knife. This part's gonna take a little bit of practice. Don't be afraid to take some test pieces, some scrap leather to get good at this. It's a little bit of a learning curve, but as you get it, you'll get better at it. There's different ways to hold the knife. Some people hold the knife like this. Some people hold it like a pen. It's really your personal preference. Most people do hold it like this to get a little more pressure. I learned this way and I'm very comfortable with it. So on this blade, you're gonna see 2 corners on it. Some blades are single side like a knife. That means you have to cut this way. The square blades, when you cut either direction, you get more use out of this knife and it lasts you longer. When you cut your leather, you're gonna go right over those interior lines that we traced out earlier. Maybe a little hard to see them in the video, but trust me, they're there. You wanna get about halfway through the leather when you cut. You kind of feel it. Just try to get it in one cut. You don't want to recut your piece. It can be a little hard to keep everything even that way. So you take your piece and you're gonna cut it and just follow that line. And the more you practice this, the better. I've been doing this for a few years, but don't be afraid to practice on scraps. I also re-wet the leather between my rounding to do this. When it's a little bit wet, the cut's gonna be a lot easier and deeper. If the leather's dry when you do this, you're gonna have a lot harder time controlling it and your cut won't be as deep. And don't be afraid to rotate your piece so you have an easier time having the best possible cut. This is usually called carving with leather. I usually say cutting my leather, but most people that do leather will laugh at you for that. It's called carving. And over, and if you're a little off your pattern lines, just don't worry. And there you go. But in this part of our project, we're doing the stamping on our leather. You want to get your beveler and your mallet. This part is a little trickier, so once again, practice on your scraps. If you look at the beveler, you're going to see 2 sides. We want to make sure that when we use this beveler, we use the bigger side of the beveler, the tall side, not the short side. This is going to give you a much better stamp on your leather. So place the deep side of your beveler into the cut. Make sure it sits in there securely. Take your mallet and you're going to run the tool down, tap, 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 never taking the beveler out of the cut. Sometimes when I do this project, you may get a little bit of bumps along the way that are a little hard to get out by tapping. Don't be afraid to take your beveler piece and just run it with your hand to smooth out those little rough spots. It'll really give your piece a much more professional look at the end. And just do a little bit of pressure just to even out the high points that you may have hit unevenly. We do want to make sure that when you do this, you do it when it's wet. If it takes you a while to carve it and it's starting to dry out, don't be afraid to wet the leather again. You don't want it soaking, just kind of, where you don't see the water on the top, just it's wet, not too dry. If it gets too dry, water it again. Maybe even take a spray bottle with water if you don't want to keep getting it back up and forth to the sink. But there you go. For the next part of our project, we're going to be punching out the straps for our bracer. Right here is where the buckle is going to go, and so you need a little opening for that tongue to go in and out of it. I moved to this location because it's a much sturdier table. I'm able to hammer with much more force without worrying about anything. Additionally, these tools are coming through here with a lot of force. They're going to go through the leather right here, and they're going to hit what's ever behind it, whether it's your table, whether it's your slab. So I have an acrylic sheet right here that you can get from Tandy. That's going to protect my tools and my workspace from damage when I'm hammering. So about a ½ inch from the end of here, I'm going to place this punch right there. Once it's in place, I'm going to hold it and hammer. And then I have a hole. Next up, we're going to punch holes so we can stitch our leather buckle into the strap. We're going to use our 2-prong diamond hole punch. You want you to fold this leather over just enough so it's a little bit of space here and there's overlap. This way, when I punch through, it's going to get through both pieces of leather. So hold that in place, take this, stamp it through, and pull the tool out. And you're going to repeat that process for both straps. Now, we're going to have to attach these straps to the actual bracer. To do this, we're going to have to punch holes just like we did before, but we're going to do it a slightly different way since this is 2 pieces of leather, not 1. First, decide where you want your straps. I usually put them right where this little pattern is right here on the edges. What's good about using the edges here, you can hide the stitches in the stamp lines you made earlier. So place your tool right there, tap it right through, and tap it the other side here. And up top, you're going to do it right here in these little pockets. Once that's done, take your straps and line them up here. Now, as you know, your wrist is usually smaller than your forearm, so take your shorter strap and line it up where you would think would be good with these holes. Right there and there. And take your longer strap for the forearm part. I usually stagger these out a little off because it's going to take more strap to get around, and I like to have this in the middle of my arm. So the top one I have out about an inch away from there. Mark with your tool, just push into it. It'll give you two little places so you know where it goes. And then take it off and just punch them through. And you're good to go. For the next part of our project, we're going to be dyeing our leather. As I said before, we're going to be using the EcoFlow Canyon Tan color. I'm going to apply it with that 1-inch sponge brush I had from earlier. First, do your edges and go all the way around. And make sure your leather is pretty dry when this happens. If it's too wet, the dye's not going to go evenly into your piece. Once all the outsides are done, you want to do the inside of your piece. There's a few different ways you can do this. The most important things is try to make it relatively even as you can, and make sure you get into the nooks and crannies of our stamping and our punching holes. Just doing big circular motions. I usually end up doing 2 to 3 coats, depending on the leather. Each piece of leather is different, so sometimes 2 coats may be plenty dark, sometimes 2 coats may not be deep enough color, and you gotta do it again. Just keep bigger strokes, work it into the crevices. Don't be too scared on your lighter dye colors. If you start doing the darker colors, you may end up having to be a little careful on how even your dye is applied. But on this medium brown, you don't gotta worry too much. Some people prefer the bison brown opposed to the canyon tan. It's all a personal preference. Most of my customers prefer the bison brown. When I cosplayed Link, and when someone asks me, I always recommend the canyon tan. It dyes nicer, it's a much richer, deeper color. Plus I think it's more accurate to the game. I also dye on something to make sure any splits or splatters that drop down are in a place that's an easy cleanup or I don't mind ruining. Make sure you get inside this little strap hole too. The piece will look really unfinished if you don't dye in there. Tandy also offers different options to use to dye. Some people use sponges, some people use a little dauber. It's really your personal preference. I prefer the sponge brushes since I've used them for other applications with watercolor, but whatever you prefer, it'll work great. Next up, we're going to do our sealer. We're going to use the EcoFlow satin sheen for this. It goes on clear, but this helps keep the dye on your project, slightly protected against, scratches, nicks, and maybe some moisture that may get on it. Apply it the same way you apply with the dye, big circles. They also offer other colors in this. Not colors, excuse me, finishes. There is more glossy finishes, more matte finishes. It's really a personal preference, but today we're using the satin, which is like the medium version of it. Make sure it goes on smooth and evenly, just like your dye. Here we go. And go on to the straps. Do your sides first. Now just let dry. Next part of our project, we're going to be stitching the item together. To do this, take your wax thread. You're going to cut a length, probably about 24 inches long, a little longer, a little shorter, doesn't really matter. And put it into your stitching needle. You want to make sure when you go through that you leave about 2 inches overlap, just like that, and twist it. It's a little different than hand stitching fabric because A, we already have the hole punched out, and B, we don't do the loop knot in the beginning, we do more knots at the end. We're going to do our buckle first. Take your strap, put the buckle here, put the tongue through the hole, fold that over. Take your needle, go from the back side first, not the top. Go through both holes. Now, at this point, when the needle's through both holes, it's going to be hard to pull it out with your fingers. And if you don't do it perfectly, it's very easy to crack the eye. So use your needle nose pliers and pull straight through. Be much easier that way. Pull it all the thread all the way through till you have about 2 or 3 inches overlap. Make sure that stays there. Go through back to the top. Once again, needle nose pliers, pull it through. Do it again to make sure it holds. It could be a little tight on the second one through because you're doubling the thread, but the pliers make it a lot easier. Once again, go through a second time. Pull it through. And then you're going to tie your knot. I tend to do a double square knot right here. Whatever knot you prefer will work fine. Be a little hard to see in the video what's happening, but I'm sure there's plenty of videos how to tie a knot right here out there. And here's a double part of the knot. Nice and secure. Get your scissors, cut the excess off, and then repeat this same thing for the other strap. Next up, we're going to attach the straps to the bracers. It doesn't matter which one you do first, but it works kind of the same way. Put the strap where you're going to want it on the back side this time. Flip it over. You're going to see your holes. Make sure they line up. Go through both sides of the leather. Flip it over. Use your pliers. Pull. Leave about 2-3 inches on the other side. Go through the hole again. Pull through. Go back through. It can be a little tricky in the second time because things start to slip and move, but take your time with it. You'll get it. Come through. Pull it. Out. And then one more time. And then tie your knot. Tie it again. And you're going to repeat this process for all 4 of these straps. Now onto our final step, just putting the holes in the straps so we can actually secure it to our arm. Take your hole punch and we're going to put it right here in the straps, usually about every 3/4 of an inch to an inch. You can measure out to be exact or you can eyeball it like I do. You're going to place it there, hammer it in, and do it on each hole. And repeat the same thing on the top. I hope you guys enjoyed my video. We're going to be keeping this a monthly service, adding different items each month, so please subscribe to my videos so you don't miss anything in the future. Also, please check out my Etsy shop at Negative Dreamer Props, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.